All right, Alexander, let's talk about the EU's attacks against Poland and Hungary. And we're going to do both of these together because it seems that while Hungary and Poland definitely vote a certain way together and do appear to be working together with EU policymakers when they have these big meetings in Brussels, so the EU also attacks them together. And in this instance, we have two different reasons why they're attacking both countries, but nonetheless, they're attacking them at the same time. And of course, there's a lot of speculation. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're actually pretty far away that Hungary could be leaving the EU, maybe even forced out of the EU if Mark Rutte gets his way. Mark Rutte has all of a sudden become the de facto leader of the EU. Now it seems that Merkel on her way out, Rutte appears to be taking over the helm as the king of Europe. It seems interesting how that worked. We commented on that. But anyway, Alexander, we have two different reasons for them attacking Hungary and Poland. But like I said, they're attacking them at the same time. This is not a coincidence. This is planned and coordinated. Once again, the EU, up to its old tricks. They just don't know how to pull back and stop this madness. Anyway, get into the story.
No, I think this is extremely interesting and very important, and I think let's try and understand what this is all about at the end of the day. I mean, on the one hand, they are trying to isolate Hungary and Poland, but what the immediate objective is not to expel either country from the EU. The EU doesn't want to expel Hungary or Poland from the EU, or indeed any country from the EU. The EU is about expanding. It's not about throwing countries out. What they want to do is to undermine the governments of those countries by isolating them and, in effect, labelling them as far-right and anti-democratic and therefore inconsistent with the democratic values of the EU. And the mechanism they're doing in each case is they're trying to call into question the voting rights of each country. So under Article 7 of the EU's treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, the EU can suspend the voting rights on the EU Council of any country that is not acting according to EU concepts, principles, call them whatever you like. So the trouble with that is that in each case, in order to do that, they need a unanimous vote of all the other states on the EU Council in order to achieve that. And what's been happening is that when they have tried to do that against Hungary, Poland opposes it. When they've tried to do that against Poland, Hungary opposes it. So they haven't been able to break that de facto alliance in order to strip these countries of their voting rights on the EU Council. So now they're attacking both at the same time. And as you rightly said, if anybody thinks this is chance or it's coincidence, well, I have a bridge to sell you. It's been very carefully structured to be done like this. Now, in the case of Poland, it is through the European Court of Justice, which has said quite astonishingly to me that certain reorganizations that the Polish government has carried out in its legal system somehow violate EU law. I mean, that is remarkable. That is micromanaging the court structure of a particular European country. I mean, every European country has a somewhat different court structure, but now the European Court of Justice is saying that it has a right to interfere in that, and it is actually saying that it has a right to declare Poland's court structure, the existing one, contrary to EU law and therefore illegal, and order Poland to change it. And at the same time, we now have EU enforcement mechanisms being used against Hungary because Hungary has passed a law which protects children from exposure to information on LGBTQ issues. And this is, of course, the usual story. This is where, Mark Rutte comes in and people like that. This is very much about imposing these cultural values on all EU countries. Hungary is a conservative, socially conservative Christian country. It's not prohibiting people from being LGBTQ on its territory. It merely says it doesn't want children to be exposed to this kind of thing in schools and such places, but that apparently now violates the ethos and legal culture of the EU and somehow proves that Hungary is a far-right country. So that's what they're doing against Hungary. So the idea is to put the two governments of each of these countries on the defensive, trying to mobilize public opinion in each of these countries, and especially in Poland. The vast majority of Poles, for the moment, still support the EU. In Hungary, it's about half even, but in Poland especially, the government is relatively weak. Weaken those countries, perhaps overturn one of these governments, break the alliance between these countries, and then they can move to strip either one of them, or perhaps both of them, of their voting rights on the EU Council. And then you can go forward to the next step, which is that will then discredit the governments, supposedly, within their countries, and bring to power in those countries governments that are more favourable to what the EU wants. So that's the game plan.
Yeah, they're looking to pretty much break these governments. These are like mafia tactics. Why would you want to, for both countries, why would you want to stay in a union that doesn't want you? I mean, they strip your voting rights. What would be the reason to even be in the European Union if they strip your voting rights?
Well, exactly. Why would you want to be? But of course, you see, the idea is that they're going to say to Poland and Hungary, well, you see, if you carry on in this way, we'll also take away your EU funding. I mean, both Poland and Hungary receive funding from the EU, which is, of course, ultimately from countries like Germany and the Netherlands. And that's the other mechanism that they use to put pressure. So it's a kind of soft sanctions, if you like, except, of course, they're not actually soft. So that undermines the economic stability of these countries. And of course, supposedly it's going to turn them against their governments. Could actually, I think, quite easily backfire. And ultimately, it might work in exactly the way you said. In Hungary, feeling has been hardening amongst Hungarians against the EU. Poland is a long way from that position yet, because, to be straightforward about it, Poland doesn't have a political leader as strong as Orban. And Poland has had a different history within the EU. Poland has done very well out of the EU. It got its debt cancelled right at the beginning. It had a lot of economic aid thrown at it. It prospered economically, at least for a time, because it was getting support from the EU. Whereas Hungary went through a terrible economic recession, which Orban took it out of. So he has a much more solid base within Hungary than the present Polish government does. But, again, the reality is Poland is a very proud country. I mean, the Poles are people who value their independence a great deal. Pushing them in this way could change those feelings. And as for Hungary, well, I'm going to make an observation, a general observation. Hungary is now being picked on because it's led by a political leader, Orban, who is a socially conservative Christian. Who set up the European Economic Community? Well, at the time of the Treaty of Rome, the leader of France was Charles de Gaulle, who was a socially conservative Catholic Christian. The leader of Germany was Konrad Adenauer, who was a socially conservative Catholic Christian. And of course, Italy at that time was governed by the Christian Democratic Party, which was socially conservative Catholic. So the EU, by saying that these people are anti-European and are anti-European values are in effect cancelling their own political and social history. I mean, if you think about it, the people who set up what became the EU had a completely different set of values to the ones we see today. Anyway, I just throw that in as a historical piece. But regardless of that, I mean, there is this antagonism towards Orban because, as I said, he is a socially conservative Catholic Christian. And obviously some people in the EU don't like that. Mark Rutte clearly doesn't.
Yeah, we'll get to Poland soon, but I want to stay on Hungary a little. We'll get to Hungary soon. I want to stay on Poland a little bit. First question: Can you say that over, say, the past 20 years? And I agree with you. If there's one country in Europe that did fairly well the past 20 years, especially when all the austerity stuff was crushing countries like Greece and Italy and Spain, Portugal, Ireland, it was Poland. But can you make the claim that Poland did relatively well the past 20 years inside the EU, not so much because of the European Union per se, but because Germany took a special interest in making sure the Polish economy did well? Can you say that? I mean, it wasn't really the EU. It was more Germany kind of taking Poland under its wing.
Absolutely true. Not just Germany, by the way, but also to a great extent the United States, which obviously has great influence in the EU. It was a geopolitical project. It was also an emotional one because, of course, Poland was always seen as the great anti-communist country in Eastern Europe, which had resisted, the Russians. So there was an enormous amount of wish and will right back in the 90s and thereafter to support Poland, because of all these emotional, geopolitical, political reasons, which meant that it got treated in a very different way from the way other countries have been treated in the EU. It was given a degree of support which, had it not had all that geopolitical and emotional, advantages, it might have been treated in a radically different way, and its experience of the EU would have been completely different. But I'm going to tell you something. All that is changing now. They're becoming so doctrinaire in Brussels that though the geopolitical imperative of supporting Poland has, if anything, actually increased because, of course, relations with Russia have become so bad, but that despite that, they are still very antagonistic. They're becoming ever more antagonistic to Poland, and we're starting to see the will to go on supporting Poland starting to slacken. I mean, the dogma is now starting to eat away even at some of the underlying strategies of the project. And bear in mind what we've said already. The EU has bad relations with all the countries that surround it: Britain, Russia, Norway, Switzerland, Turkey. It's now adding Poland and Hungary to that grouping, even though these countries are still within the EU, because, again, they reject the ideology of the EU centre. Hungary has a socially conservative, sovereigntist approach. Poland also has a socially conservative, sovereigntist approach. They each have their own currencies, for example. They each insist on their right to run their own affairs in various ways. And what more important sovereign right does a country have than determining the structure of its own courts?
Right. I agree. Very quickly, can you also say that Germany took an economic interest in Poland because they saw Poland, okay, it's obviously on a map, it's right there, so it's good for Germany to invest there. But they saw a very educated workforce. They saw lower wages, a lower price, a lower cost of doing business. So I think there was that factor as well, correct, for Germany
absolutely.
to work
absolutely.
with Poland.
I actually know German business people who actually set up factories in Poland because they found the quality of those workers there exceptionally high and the quality of workmanship exceptionally high. And as a result, Poland became very much, in many places, an industrial annex of Germany. By the way, I think that worked very well for Poland up to a certain point. And of course, we saw in the late 90s, 2000s, still to some extent now, Poland clocking up very high growth rates. I think that's faded for some time now. And of course, the great disadvantage, if you do that, if you hitch your economy to the economy of another country, is that, of course, you face ultimately technological stagnation because your industrial system becomes dependent on what another country does. And of course, what the Germans tend to do, and I'm not criticizing German business for them for this, is that they pass on the cheaper, less technologically advanced part of their businesses to Poland in order to keep the more sort of productive, technologically advanced part of it in Germany itself. So it puts a ceiling on how advanced Poland's economy can be. So Poland witnessed a very, very rapid growth in sort of lower or middle end manufacturing. The very high end, it's not really happened. And that's partly a product of this. So, you don't see Poland, for example, playing a very big role in IT or AI or things of that kind, where given how educated the country might be, you might have expected that you would.
Right. Okay. So right now the EU is using the legal structure of Poland to go after them. If it can't go after them in this way, they're going to figure out another way to go after them, because it does appear that the EU has taken a look at both countries, like you said, and they said, okay, Poland, out of both of them, the Polish society seems to be more split between, love for the EU or hate for the EU. They seem to be more conflicted. And the EU would like to take advantage of Poland's division in order to move them towards EU control. What kind of a time frame do you think the EU has to work with in order to take over Poland, in order to pry Poland away from this social conservative ideology and move them more towards a neoliberal, pro-Brussels, pro-core ideology? I mean,
absolutely.
What's the EU working with here?
I think they have a very short time frame indeed. I think that they're intending to try and achieve all of this within a year. I think the attack is going to be that sustained and that strong. And let's first of all start with the court decision, because what they're going to do with the court decision is the Poles have now said they will not carry out this law. Their constitution is higher than EU law. Now, that is in some ways a revolutionary statement. Germany can say that. I mean, the German Constitutional Court said that about a year ago. But that's Germany. Germany is, the great power within the EU. For the Poles to actually defy the European Court of Justice in that way, with the European Court of Justice has always insisted that EU law takes precedence over national law. That is an extraordinary step. But the Poles have said that. So the next step will be to fine Poland, and we'll start getting fines being levied on Poland every day. The next step will be to start putting the financial squeeze on Poland by cutting Poland's access to structural funding from the EU. Donald Tusk, remember him? He was the Prime Minister of Poland for a long time, a sort of neoliberal figure. He then went and became EU Commission President. He's now apparently returning to Poland to mobilize the opposition, as he says, to the government there. And so all of this is all the pieces are now moving and are being put in place to launch a big offensive against Poland. And it's going to be, money is going to be the major lever. They're going to say, we're going to cut off your access to structural funds unless you change your position. And you're absolutely right. The court system is only the first line of attack. One of the reasons why both Poland and Hungary recovered, or rather the governments there are popular, is because they have in both cases, I said these are socially conservative countries. Part of that social conservatism involves very strong social policies, welfare policies. So they're going to attack those. They're going to say these are contrary to the EU mechanisms, which are, as I said, ultimately neoliberal mechanisms. They're going to attack those. They're going to say, you've got to cut funding on this. We can't afford to give you structural funding if you continue with these policies. It's going to put Poland under a lot of pressure. So we're going to see a concerted move against Poland going on. And at the same time, there will be increasing steps to try to isolate Hungary from every other EU country, talking about how, the government of Hungary is toxic, how, it's been thrown out of the European People's Party in the European Parliament. That's already essentially happened. They're going to move steadily to try to weaken each of these governments, pick off Poland first because it's seen as weaker, and then slowly isolate Hungary in order to squeeze it. And I gather that the people at the Commission are now absolutely, enthusiastic about this. Ursula von der Leyen is very keen on cracking down on these two countries. And we're going to see, and with Merkel out of the way, because Merkel on this was apparently something of a restraining force, as she often is, because she liked to play the East Europeans off against other factions. With Angela Merkel out of the picture, you can be absolutely sure the offensive will intensify.
Right. They want chaos in Poland. They want the people to suffer on an economic level so that the government can fall. That's pretty much what they're aiming for. It's really interesting. That's the approach that they're taking with Poland. And they're doing a similar approach with Hungary, but I think Hungary has one major difference that Poland doesn't have as far as the EU's attacking strategy, and that is that they also paint the picture of Hungary being led by an authoritarian, conservative, right-wing dictator, and they play that up on the international stage, where in Poland, they don't really play up the international marketing aspect of, Duda is evil and the government is evil and they're dictators. They don't really bother with that. They just focus more on making the people inside of Poland suffer and making sure that the country's government collapses. Where in Hungary, yes, they want the government to collapse. Yes, they want the people to suffer. Yes, they want economic hardship. But they also have this international marketing campaign going where Orban is the Putin of Europe. He is the evil dictator of Europe as well. And they splash that across all mainstream media outlets all over the world.
Absolutely.
So, it's an assault on Hungarian identity as well.
Absolutely. Hungarian identity, Hungarian governments, and of course the Hungarian leader, who's, as I said, and I want to reiterate this, whose ideas, whose ideas are essentially the same. The ones he's being attacked for are essentially the same ones that the EU's founding fathers, Adenauer, de Gaulle, the Christian Democratic Party, and the rest, once had. I mean, that's the paradox. Of course, it wasn't the EU then. It was the European Economic Community. But, when Ireland joined the European Economic Community in the early 1970s, it was a conservative Catholic country in those days. All of the things, as I seem to remember, they didn't even have divorce in those days in Ireland. They didn't have abortion. They certainly didn't have abortion. And nobody fretted about that then. Nobody said that was contrary to European values. But of course now, that's become centre stage. It's extraordinary to someone like me to see how completely this has changed. And to be straightforward about it, I also have to say, I think it's partly being used now increasingly as an enforcement mechanism. I mean, we've heard all about, cancel culture, and it seems to me that you can use it against individuals, and you can use it against political leaders, and you can use it against entire countries. Cancel Hungary and cancel Poland. Cancel Hungary especially. Strip it of its voting rights.
Yeah, they did a number on Ireland, though. At the end of the day, they really got to Ireland, and they turned what
Absolutely.
I always thought was I always had a picture of Ireland in my mind as being a relatively conservative Catholic country, definitely a Catholic country. This is, once again, the perception. I think a lot of people had that perception of Ireland. And now I see Ireland in a much different light. I think it's probably one of the more liberal countries in Europe now.
Absolutely.
Once again, a perception.
Well,
I'm not saying that's
it,
the reality on the ground, but it seems like the EU really did a number on Ireland. I think they want to do the same to Hungary.
Well, Ireland has been transformed. It's completely different from how it was for most of its existence. And of course, Hungary is the same. Of course, Ireland has the great difference in that it's, sandwiched between Britain and the United States. And so it's much more exposed to cultural shifts in Britain and the United States. And of course, it's part of the Anglosphere. So, there's that factor. Hungary doesn't have that. It's not in that situation. But yes, of course, that's exactly what they want. And of course, I think, as I say, it's partly an enforcement mechanism, but it's also to a great extent become a dogma now. Some of the people in Brussels, and of course, certainly people definitely believe it. For them, this is very, very much now an article of faith. It has to be imposed on everybody. And if people don't like it, well, that just proves that they're, reactionaries. And I don't want to throw the F word around, but we all know what I mean.
Yeah. It's become a religion because they don't have a religion.
It's become a religion.
Something had to replace it.
Well, it's absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. They have that big hole in their soul, and something had to take it over. But why, on the same subject then, why Mark Rutte? Why has he been given the microphone? Why has he been given the bullhorn to go after Hungary the way he is going after them?
Well, partly it must be said it's because, of course, the Netherlands is there are socially liberal countries in Europe, and then there's the Netherlands, which takes that a step further. And of course, one of the reasons why Mark Rutte himself is being able to sort of gain power in the Netherlands is precisely because he presents himself as being the radical social liberal, and I think to some extent he believes it. If you look into his political past, you will find that he was always very much on the radical end of socially liberal policies. But ultimately, and I'm going to say this very straightforwardly, I think this is where the geopolitics comes in. Rutte is very much also somebody who is connected with the Anglo-American neocon faction. And one of the reasons he's particularly antagonistic to Hungary is that Hungary has good relations with Russia, very bad relations with Ukraine. We had a letter from one of our viewers who was talking to us about this and how Hungary is objecting to the new language and nationality laws which have been passed in Ukraine. So, of course, the neocons want to back Ukraine, so that makes Orban suspect there. And of course, the other thing about Orban is that he imported certain medications from Russia to deal with the pandemic. He didn't break any EU regulations and laws by doing that, but that again proves that he's politically unreliable. So you have all of these things taken together. So from a neocon point of view, and as I said, Rutte is very much aligned with that tendency. Hungary especially, Orban in particular, is a deeply suspect figure. He must be removed because he's disloyal. He's not part of our camp.
Very quickly, do you think that Merkel played a role in giving Rutte this type of soapbox, this type of power? I know they were close and they were allies in a way, but do you think that Merkel and people are in and around Merkel they kind of looked at Merkel's successor and they said, well, I don't know if he's really up to the task of taking care of our neoliberal EU quote unquote values. But Rutte, he's been steady. He's been a steady hand. He's been around for a long time. Let's have him, be the caretaker of the EU value system.
Well, indeed, because, of course, from Merkel's point of view, she's failed to find an adequate successor in Germany. I mean, her latest pick, Armin Laschet, in Germany, is now running into all kinds of problems. I mean, he was seen laughing because of during a speech by the German president about the people who've died and perished in the floods, for example. He doesn't come across as a very convincing figure, despite all the attempts to sort of build him up. AKK, who Merkel also supported the previous iteration, she's gone down in flames. So Merkel never really found a successor to herself in Germany. So, look around. Who else can you find who can take Merkel's place? Well, Mark Rutte is an obvious candidate. I mean, he seems solidly in control of his country, and the Netherlands is an important country. It's small, but it's central to the EU. It's very much part of the EU. So for that reason, he's an obvious candidate for this kind of thing. And you put him there, and you make him, you give him centre stage, and it looks increasingly as if he's going to take over.
Yeah, many globalist institutions as well in the Netherlands. A lot of globalist
very many.
institutions.
I mean, absolutely.
Final question: do you think they're going to succeed? I mean, do you think they will succeed in breaking Poland and in breaking Hungary?
I don't think so. Actually, I think what it's much more likely to do is that it's going to provoke a backlash, not just in those countries, but in some of the other East European countries that are becoming increasingly concerned about the way in which East Europeans are being picked on. I think not only is it going to fail, I think it's going to fail badly. I think Orban looks very secure in Hungary. I mean, the problem they have with Hungary is that there's no real convincing opposition to Orban within Hungary. I mean, there are obviously opposition parties. They can bring out lots of people in a protest in Budapest, but they don't seem to be able to win elections. Poland is more evenly balanced, but I suspect that going after the Polish government in this way could actually work against the EU, because, again, it looks like the EU trying to bully Poland. And that I think will be a shock to many Poles. And, of course, that could provoke a reaction in Poland as well. And I suspect it probably will. But then other EU countries, like, say, Slovakia, even the Czech Republic, looking at all of this, will start to say to themselves, well, hold on, is this really what we signed up for? I mean, remember, Hungary is very much part of the Visegrad grouping, and is in good standing with the Visegrad states, the Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and the others. So, I mean, I can very easily see how this could backfire. And instead of working against Orban, this could actually strengthen him in the end. And, of course, if there's political change in southern Europe, which, we've just done a programme on Italy with our friend, our new partner agency there, and with Simone Mariam. If there's political change in Italy and political change in Spain, that would be alarming, even more alarming. So that could easily create a block. I wonder, in fact, whether part of the reason why they're so determined to pick off Poland and Hungary now is because they're looking at the situation down south and they're becoming increasingly worried about it. And there are lots of social conservatives in Italy and in Spain also, more perhaps in Italy than in Spain. So that may be also another thing that they're worried about.
Yeah, you're definitely listening to you. You definitely seem more secure in Hungary's position than Poland's.
Oh yes. I mean, you can see. I mean, first of all, politics in Poland are very evenly balanced. I mean, the ruling party only just narrowly won the last parliamentary election. So, and if you look at opinion polls in Poland, I mean, there were over 80% of the population supports Poland's membership of the EU. In Hungary, I think it's something like 48, 49%. So it's a huge difference. And it's important to say that support for the EU in both countries is actually falling, it's declining. But of course, it has to decline from a very much higher level in Poland than it has in Hungary. So it's a different perspective. But then Poland used to be considered to be the more socially conservative of the two, and the country with the more powerful Catholic Church. So it's it's attacking a key aspect of Polish identity. I mean, the idea of a non-Catholic Pole is one that many Poles still find difficult to accept. So these offensives, as I said, hit at the very identity of Poland and of how the Polish people feel about themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's going to be a tough society and culture to break down.
Absolutely.
The Polish culture. It's going to be a tough one for the EU to break down.
Absolutely.
They'll take a shot at it.
Oh no! I mean, these people never give up. I mean, and as you said, they never give up. They never give up either. So I mean, that's entirely likely.
All right. Well, what a story! All right, guys, check us out on Locals. Post anything you want on Locals. It is our community, and there is no censorship. You'll find Alexander's content. You'll find my content. You'll find the Duran's content. You'll find all kinds of other content on Locals as well. So check it out. Link down below. BitChute, Super U, ODYSEE, and Rumble. You'll find us all on those platforms as well. Definitely check out Super U, fantastic platform. And Duran Shop, 10% off when you go to the Duran Shop, Alexander, and you use the code Real News. My mug is the South Africa.
I mean, that's fantastic mug, and that's South Africa. Wow. Mm.
Yes. So you'll find that at the Duran Shop, link down below. Take care.
Can I just say about our mugs, just to remind everybody, I've had lots and lots of mugs from our shop. Not one has chipped, not one has cracked, the handle has never broken off. They are really outstanding mugs. As somebody who drinks about 5 cups of coffee a day, I should know. I've smashed and broken more mugs ever. And I haven't so much as not a single one of my Duran mugs have even discolored even. I mean, they are exceptional mugs. They're the best you can get.
Mm-hmm. Don't purposefully smash it on the ground just to test it out. But for the most part, it's a pretty sturdy mug. All right. Take care, everybody.